if it wasn't for COVID, he probably would be spending most Motzei Shabbat evenings at bar mitzvahs,
Right.
right? And that hasn't happened. It's one of those, let's talk, unspoken losses that COVID has brought. And there's many opportunities and many good things that have happened. But one of those losses for kids, of that age, is that they lose this whole cohort of the social interaction of the bar mitzvah and bat mitzvah that takes place during this time, and it's part of forming their social being, and now they're doing it through virtually. So it will be interesting what will come out as a study a decade from now and how that impacted social interaction of that age cohort.
For sure.
Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
That's okay, please. In fact, I think the last time that I saw you in person maybe was at Bialik's high school graduation last spring, which they ended up doing outside on the field without any immediate family, right? I mean, poor kids that did not get to experience high school graduation with parents, grandparents, siblings, friends, a party afterwards. And this is just one little drop in the bucket. And perhaps we will focus on, other drops. The same kids didn't get to go on trips like March of the Living, right? Which, education aside, is a huge social event and a huge social learning opportunity.
And it's going to be the second year, by the way.
That's right.
Because the decision's already been made for April 2021 that there will be no March of Living. And again, there's a number of factors. You talk about losses. You also talk about the fact that we've now missed 2 years of having Holocaust survivors, be the key witnesses and storytellers to a whole generation of grade 11 students, 2 generations now of grade 11 students who have not had that opportunity to spend time with them. And while, of course, the Holocaust Museum and programming that we've put out is providing some additional Holocaust education, it's never going to be the same. Right. And that's one of those other losses, and again, we're thinking about what can we do in the summer of 2022 to perhaps capture those 2 cohorts, okay, and provide them the opportunity to go so that they haven't completely lost the experience. And that's the kind of scenario planning that we're doing for the future to see what we can do to help make sure that is not a complete loss for those 2 cohorts.
Right. Amazing. Well, before we sort of delve into things like the march and missions and community, I was wondering if you could tell us just a snippet about yourself, about your background, how you sort of got into community. I mean, you've essentially been at Federation. Is it
a long time?
Yeah, a long time. I mean, I would say at least 15 years, maybe even 20 years now. I mean,
not that long.
No, Howard, you knew me in 2004 in the March of the Living, when I used to run the March of the Living.
That's true.
Yeah.
That's true.
So I actually started off at the Bronfman Israel Experience.
In fact, Howard's the person that got me into the March of the Living.
That's right.
He's responsible for a lot of things.
Yeah, it's all his fault.
But if you go back, 2002, I actually moved to Montreal for a position as director of the Bronfman Israel Experience Center.
And you moved from Toronto.
From Toronto, yes. The 401 actually drove east at the time. Wow. I'm not sure it still does so, but at the time it really did. And I moved to Montreal, really with a lot of passion to try and do something. If you remember the time in Israel's history, it was the Second Intifada. In fact, I moved here after 2 months after the Passover bombing, if you recall, at the Dolphinarium that took place where 21 kids were killed. And I decided to move to Montreal to take on a position at the Bronfman Israel Experience Center. And I loved that experience. There is nothing, and for those who've had the opportunity, nothing more, I guess, inspirational, and Howard will probably attest to this, and so will Adam, than taking young adults, they're teenagers, to Israel for the first time and watching their face as they start recognizing what it means to be part of Jewish history and Jewish peoplehood. It was the most incredible journey for me, and during those years from 2002 to 2005, we were able to really increase the number of kids that went to Israel. When I stepped foot in the Israel Experience Center, we were 380 kids who went that year, and when I left in 2005, we were over 1,300 kids, and it was an incredible journey. And then I transferred my skills into the fundraising world, and I was the director of operations for the campaign. Shortly thereafter, I was appointed the campaign director, and in 2018 appointed the CEO of Federation. And in the midst of all that, have had the opportunity to get married to probably the better known of the two of us, Essie Weinberg, who's an incredible teacher at Bialik, and have two amazing kids, one who's 12, Jonah, and Emma, who's 9, and they're both in Jewish day school. So that's, in a nutshell, how I made my journey here.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. So let's just really jump right in. March 2019 hits, or I should say, sort of end of Jan. I was actually in Poland. I was in Poland as part of the 75th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz, and I was at the airport coming home when I had an hour to kill before the flight, having a drink at the bar, and I look up at the screen and I see COVID-19 and virus and flu, and and the first news headlines were essentially telling people that are in airports traveling to wear masks. And I said, what's and by the time that I landed in Toronto about 9 hours later, I sensed more people wearing masks, to the point where I asked the border guy, I'm like, how come so many people are in masks? And he said, because there's this virus that came out and everyone should be wearing masks now. Fast forward a month, and of course, Federation, just like the synagogue, just like were really blindsided, really hit hard, and were forced to make serious decisions and serious adaptations. So can you sort of walk us through a bit, how did Federation, in terms of the business, in terms of the in-house operations, there's a huge staff. It's a huge, there's so much going on in that building. And how did you react? How did everyone react? And if you could sort of, explain to us how the wheels were set in motion to communicate to all these agencies and all these social services and all these, subgroups, organizations, that we have to close. And we have to close. And this is, and I would think that it sort of all came to you as CEO, and the sort of board of directors, I would think, first of all, to make that decision. And then how did you implement that? And how did you, how did you communicate to people? And sort of, if you wouldn't mind explaining to us a bit about that.
Not a problem. So maybe I'll start on February 23rd. And on February 23rd, I was lucky enough to be on a cruise ship with my in-laws and my family, my wife and 2 kids, heading back from the Caribbean, when we stopped in, sorry?
Spring break.
Yeah. When we stopped in Key West, and my phone started going off as soon as we got off the boat at 7 o'clock in the morning. What had happened was actually a group of grade 9 students from Montreal were on a program that we call Dorot. It's a program that has 20 kids, grade 9 kids from Montreal, volunteer in Beersheba Bnei Shimon for the spring break period, and they spend the last weekend at the hotel in Beersheba, kind of debriefing and bringing Shabbat, and then they leave on the Sunday back to Montreal. My phone starts ringing about the fact that on the Saturday evening Israel time, news story broke that the hotel in Beersheba hosted a delegation of South Korean travelers 6 days before our delegation of Montrealers checked in.
I remember this.
The challenge was that while we had no overlap between the Montreal delegation and the Korean delegation, when the Korean delegation returned back home, they found out that 9 South Koreans were tested positive from that delegation. And very, 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 very soon thereafter, the question became, what is a contact of a contact of a contact, and what is the procedure to deal with a contact of a contact of a contact? And my in-laws, who I think are on this call, and my wife will attest that this became a real, a real long boat ride back to Fort Lauderdale, and then flight back to Montreal. And we tried to figure out whether these kids who had never seen the South Koreans were in any danger of coming back to Montreal, because not all the staff had been tested, or not all the results of the staff that were on hand had come in, and we had to get them back to Canada. We had spoken to, we started off with Health Canada, which made it very clear that we had to deal with Santé Montréal. We had to deal with the airport authorities. Long story short, we were able to get the kids back to Montreal, and I just saw that somebody's child was on there. It was a real marathon for us. It was a sprint and a marathon, trying to understand exactly what the repercussions were. We very quickly put together a COVID task force, actually on February 24th, because we recognized how quickly this becomes an issue when you think you're 6,000 miles away from a problem. And it became an issue for us almost a week later, when there was a Moot Beit Din contest in Montreal. And again, high school students from our community came into contact with high school students from New York, from that first case in New York. And again, we had to figure out what would be the procedure of keeping kids home, and what would be the advice to give to the schools. Our COVID committee was put right into place. There were a number of doctors, very much, I would say, experts in the field of infectious diseases, and they were advising us throughout this entire time on how to deal with each matter. I will tell you that the most important part of dealing with this during those early days was clarity and transparency in communication, getting out messages to the right people at the right time, with crystal clear understanding of what the, as the doctors would say, what would the sequence of events that would lead to making a decision, and getting that information out as soon as possible. We recognize that this is going to hit the shores of Montreal soon thereafter, and this was March 1st. We put together a group of professionals working with our social service agencies and our food, call it the MADAs, and the family stores of the world, those who are deeply involved in distributing food. And we got together on a weekly basis to chart out plans of what would happen if we went into a lockdown like they did in China. Now, if you recall, China was already in complete lockdown, right? You would be allowed at the time 1 hour with a pass to go shopping. So we had to start doing the math. What would happen with our aging population, Holocaust survivors? We had the great expertise of the Cummings Jewish Center for Seniors, OMITS, and those who deal with vulnerable populations. And we basically put together a task force along with our shlichim, Adi and Shmuel, who had an expertise in, let's call it triage. And we were able to chart out, we actually had a boardroom, which was called the War Room, until March 13th when we were shut down. So for 2 weeks, we had a boardroom where we actually had on the wall every scenario you could think of, with what the plan would be, how we would mobilize volunteers. We had a pyramid through WhatsApp of leaders, and then the people who would be distributing food. We acted immediately to purchase somewhere in the tune of 5,000 frozen meals, so that none of the seniors at the Bnei B'rith House or Caldwell House would go hungry. We purchased $100,000 in food vouchers right away at IGA, so we could distribute them, so that those who are on welfare wouldn't have to come to us, and because we weren't sure that people would be allowed out. So we made sure that it got into the right hands. And we worked very closely with all the social service agencies to make sure that volunteers and professionals of Federation were able to coordinate the food distribution. As soon as we went to lockdown and everything changed, we started working with the city of Côte-Saint-Luc to try and find solutions for food distribution. Because what you had a group of people who couldn't afford food, who needed help, and you had a group of people who were coming back from Florida who were quarantined, and the IGAs weren't sending food fast enough. We actually had the city of Montreal, the city of Côte-Saint-Luc help us with the 2 IGAs in Côte-Saint-Luc. They would actually open for us at 8 o'clock in the morning and stay open till 9 o'clock at night for us. And what would happen is at 8 o'clock at night, a group of volunteers with lists will go into the store. They would pack the non-perishables by cart and tag them. And then the next morning, the same group would pack the perishables at 8 o'clock. And by 9 o'clock, they would be going to apartment buildings to distribute food for those who either couldn't go on their own because they were homebound because of isolation, or couldn't afford it. So it was an incredible mobilization of 700 volunteers and staff to do that during the crisis, and then things became a little more normal, if I would say, in terms of the crisis, because we started being able to make those tough decisions of what to do, when to do it, because we knew what the pace would be. And with the partnership with the Jewish Community Foundation that immediately released funds for us to do all this, it became a lot more tenable for us to really provide support for our community members. What I will say, and which was of course challenging from a leadership perspective, and like you said, is making those tough decisions, because I will tell you, and those of you who are donors, and thank you for all you do for Combined Jewish Appeal, our collections rate, we work on a pledge pay basis. We have a donor that gives $1, and they give that $1 between September and December, and they have till the following December to pay it. On average, we collect, let's say $2 million a month on those pledges, and that money is distributed throughout the community for all the good that we do. The challenge was that during the months of March, April, and May, we were collecting about 40%, and cash flow became a real issue for us. We immediately, on April 1st, laid off 30% of the staff on a temporary basis, and all took salary cuts starting at 10% and up to 20% with me. And we all kind of hunkered down, waiting to see when things would change. And they started changing. In July, we went out fundraising, and this is the most generous, incredible community in North America. And we're on a 2-year, $100 million campaign to address all the needs in this community. And I'll proudly tell you that we've hit the $77 million mark, with a lot to do still left, but no community responds like this community. But that allowed us to kind of start reimagining what our business would look like, because in the absence of immersive experiences, Israel experiences, Shinshinim programs, by the way, you want to talk about our business, we are a charity, that. We collect money, we allocate money. No one really talks about us as a landlord, right? We own a building that houses 8 agencies. Now, those agencies don't worry about garbage collection, about security. We take care of their payroll. We are the back office for most of these agencies, IT. We take care of 500 phones. We only employ 100 people, but we take care of all those facets, the IT, everything that takes care of all the agencies, so they can do the work, taking care of the people, making sure there's Jewish summer camps, so on and so forth. Those are the real key elements. We had to make decisions about our building. We have a Gelber Conference Center. I'm not sure when the next conference will be take place at the Gelber Conference Center. So we had to make decisions to shut some business lines. We've shrunk to to a monthly expenses about 30% of normal, and that's really to maintain the building. Our building is open. We are an essential service. On a daily basis, there are probably 50 people in the building. Now, it's a building that houses 500 people, right? Every day, on a regular day, 500 people work there, whether it's ometz, whether it's Cummings Jewish Center for Seniors, Camp Nate Brith, whether it's CSUQ, all these, the Jewish Public Library, the Holocaust Center, they all house there. But right now, about 10% are entering the building on a daily basis. We have very strict protocols on how you can enter the building. You must fill out a form in advance announcing that you're coming. You must come in, you must check your temperature, things that are of normal course. And again, we have encouraged now not to come in the next 2 weeks. And I guess I'll say the final thing, and we haven't even really talked about the other impacts we've had in community. We've just talked about food. But one of the greatest concerns that I have as a CEO is the mental health of my staff. It's been a long 10 months.
Right.
It's been 10 months where we're all confined to our homes, where, you know, staff who were fundraisers or staff who were Israel Experience Engagement staff were packing care packages for the frontline workers at all the old age homes in the West End, and they did that for weeks in our Galbert Conference Center, which was shut but was a huge space where Kruger Paper donated 50,000 rolls of toilet paper so that no one would run short in the old age homes. So we became a center for the distribution of PPE for schools, for every for the agencies. And I actually decided to force close Federation. We're actually closed for business. The building is open, and some, the finance department's working, and the operations and the security department are working, but the rest are actually on a forced vacation, so that when we reemerge in January, we'll be all ready for whatever the next wave brings. And I'll just end, and then we can go into the other stuff that we've done in community. You asked me how did you manage to deal with all this? On a daily basis, Federation has its job, right? We raise money, we think strategically for the community, we do planning, but we pivoted very quickly to become a crisis center with very strong professionals who were ready to shoulder anything that came their way. I can't tell you enough the hours, and my wife, who's probably on the call, could attest to this. The hours that never ended, making sure that this community wouldn't go without want, and making sure that all the needs would be met. And we were able to do so in some real tough scenario planning, which had everything from what would happen if charity wouldn't continue for a while. Luckily, that didn't happen, but every single scenario under the sun, we have a board that says this is what we'll do, and we spend hours dealing with it.
Wow.
May have been too long of an answer.
No. I mean, Montreal should be proud, I think. Wow. Do you find that the needs have changed the last 2 months? I would think sort of March, April, May, sort of until June, July, there was this sort of frantic need for things. And then maybe throughout July and August, things perhaps settle down a little bit. And now that sort of winter is coming, and we're looking at another period.
Long winter.
And, please God, may we all thaw out in the spring. But winter is going to be dark and lonely.
Mm-hmm.
I think we're all being told, stay home, don't go out. While it perhaps doesn't feel as frantic, do you see or sense the needs of the community changing now? Is it a question of those that are in need are in more need? Have you seen perhaps a new demographic of person become needy now?
So it's been an interesting. We actually conducted 2 needs assessments during this period, because the only way to understand what was going on is to talk to community and get feedback. So the first need assessment was based on the organizations. The second need assessment, which was a very deep one, surveyed 2,500 people in this community and had specific COVID-related questions. I will tell you that between March and I'm going to say November, because that's when my data ends. So December will be different, maybe, I don't know, but let's talk about November. I can tell you a couple of things. One is, in terms of, I think this crisis has impacted all of us. I can tell you it's impacted me financially, it's impacted my mental health, it's impacted my relationship with my kids, all good, bad, and otherwise. So it's impacted all of us. It has adversely impacted to the point of people being worse off, 20% of this community. And that number is now through 2 needs assessments and the data we gathered from all the Jewish day schools at the same time. So we now know that there's a 20% impact on community. So if we look at ourselves as somewhere in the tune of 85,000, 20% of this community has been adversely impacted, and to the point of detriment, right? So I've been impacted, but not to the point of detriment. We've had a number of solutions. You know, our generous community has raised a lot of money to address this. I can tell you that at our November board meeting, the board resolved 2 very important allocations of dollars. The first was an allocation of $2.4 million to the Jewish day schools. That's above and beyond the $5 million allocation we make on an annual basis through TAA and CAP. So above and beyond the $5 million, we allocated $2.4 million in addition to recognize that.
Exactly. That's
sorry.
And that's to help what?
So it's to recognize, again, if it was only tuition based, then the allocation would have been probably smaller.
Okay.
But we had to recognize that schools have spent, and we asked them for this data, so we have a spreadsheet that shows each school's spend. The schools have spent, 13 schools have spent $5.3 million to open up during COVID. $5.3 million, which represents additional tuition assistance, PPE, additional teachers, technology, air filtration systems, whatever it is they did, $5.3 million. And the partnership of the schools has always been, you know, the government, the parents, the school, and Federation. And in this case, Federation felt that it was we had to be a bigger partner than everybody else for the help that the schools needed. And we provided $2.4 million in relief to the schools and in early November, which helped address all their needs for additional tuition and so on and so forth. I'll tell you just an anecdotal story. We went out to the schools in July and told them that one of the greatest fears we had is parents pulling out their kids due to the fact that they had lost income. And we asked the schools not to let parents pull out kids if they said that they were dealing with extraordinary COVID situation. When the message was received to the schools, they were now transmitting this message to parents. I got an email I have 2 email boxes. One is CEO at Federation CJA and the other is Yair.Szlak at FederationCJA.org. And I got a beautiful message to my CEO mailbox from a father of 3, somebody who does fairly well in life, had actually just bought a dentistry business in January, and said to me that he had lost everything because he couldn't, he wasn't earning any income in those 3 months in which he invested in a dentistry business and was pulling his 3 kids out of school, and wrote to me that because we were there, not only did he not pull his kids out, but he was committed to make it up and make sure that as soon as he's back on his feet, would be able to. And this is the kind of vulnerability that we didn't usually see in this community, right? Because when we talk about the vulnerable, we don't talk about people who have businesses who are suddenly shuttered. So there is a new vulnerability in this community. We anticipate another 400 families or so who are now in the midst of helping through the Gesher program and addressing their needs to pay rent so that they're not evicted. And actually on Wednesday, I have our committee, our COVID allocations committee's meeting to review about $500,000 in additional requests for mental health. Because when you ask me, what am I seeing on the horizon? The greatest need we're seeing right now is to deal with mental health. It's a very tough issue to deal with because it requires self-identification, of course. We are now going to campaign for the mental health of the Montreal Jewish community. We began today actually with an email that basically said, it's okay not to be okay, but it's also okay to call and find out. We have a 24-hour hotline that is available, and it's asking people to call, and we will be there for them. But we need them to self-identify to get through this. And part of the relief is also what you're doing right here, and that's relief from isolation.
Yeah.
Getting 30 people on a call and having an evening to talk about, whatever it is, even hearing from the CEO of Federation, but having the opportunity to engage, and really encouraging as many of our community organizations to do so, because it's critical to maintain, the mental health of this community.
Wow. Let's talk Israel for a second.
Yes.
No secret. Federation does so much for Israel. I actually sat on the Israel and Overseas Committee for 2 years, and I was shocked and I was amazed with all the programs, all the funding, the relationship that the Montreal Jewish community has with the state of Israel is probably one of the strongest in the world. Specifically Beersheba, but certainly the whole country. Has that relationship been affected? And have the needs of Israel impacted the relationship? And is that not really on the forefront these days?
So it's an interesting question because we debated it quite a bit.
Mm-hmm.
This is the great equalizer, right? When we talk about crisis fundraising, we usually talk about a crisis that's going on in Israel, right? There's a second Lebanon war. There's an intifada. We need to rescue Ethiopian Jews, Russian Jewry, you name it. This community, and North American Jewry for the most part, has always been there in support of Israel and in her time of need. And here we are, and this is an incredible equalizer because I am sitting here as my counterparts are sitting in Israel, and we're struggling with the exact same situation, right? There's no difference in the fact that we're all suffering from the exact same problem.
Good point.
And I will say, I'll say one further thing. The relationship between the Montreal Jewish community and Israel, and by the way, I don't know if you've read this statistic, but 80% of Montrealers have been to Israel at least once, okay? And of that 80%, 60% have been to Israel at least 5 times.
Hold on one second. 80% of Jewish
Montreal, 79% to be accurate.
That is an astounding.
It is an incredible fact.
And 60% have been
of those 79, at least 5 times.
Wow.
Okay. And that comes from the Environic study that was done 2 years ago of Montreal Jewry. Okay. It's an incredible statistic. Our relationship, and by the way, I'm not trying to, beat on my chest in terms of Federation, but between 2014 and 2017, with 2 mega missions, 3 March of Livings, the number of birthrights we did in those 3 years alone, okay, we took close to 5,000 Montreal Jews to Israel.
Yeah, honeymoon Israel,
you name it, okay? But Dorot, keep on going, right? So the relationship between Montreal Jewry and Israel is not a financial one. If anyone pegs it as a financial relationship, they don't understand the relationship because it's so much deeper than that. The relationship goes beyond the financial contributions we made. And one of the things that we had to look at is because we had to cut back on our allocations locally. And by the way, there are organizations that are shuttered that you can't fund. We have donors who want to make sure that the funds go to the most important needs. If an organization is shuttered and not functioning, we have to divert money to the most important needs. We did the same calculation in Israel. And we made sure that our allocation is addressing the most important needs. And one of the most incredible things, and it'll take me too long to find a picture, so I'm going to explain it in a minute and a half. One of the things that we decided to fund early on in Israel was a piece of technology that is so simple that would blow your mind. It was actually a piece of technology invented by university students at Beersheba, Ben Gurion University, not Beersheba University, Ben Gurion University in Beersheba. And it was almost like an iPad, but only had two buttons, answer and disconnect. And it could be connected to Facebook and FaceTime and every single option that you wanted. And it was distributed to seniors' homes in Beersheba.
Wow.
Because sometimes it was too complicated and too expensive for them to have iPads and other technology. But it was a simple device that you just had to press yes and no, hang up and pick up. And people could talk to their family during these months. And it was an incredible piece of technology. So we funded the ability to distribute that. So we were working in the same way we were working here, addressing the critical needs that we need to address to make sure that people will continue to be able to live their lives. I think if anything, you asked a question about has the relationship deteriorated, got stronger. I would say, if anything, you know, I was on the phone this morning with Yair Levi, who's the Director General in Israel, talking about Shinshinim 2021, right? I would say the relationship is as strong, if not stronger. We're planning, how do we bring Israel back into our lives in a strong way? We're looking at missions that are going to go to Israel. We're already planning them for October. Again, I don't know that we'll be there in October. I'm just saying we've put a marker in the sand that we'd like to, and we're going to try and plan, because we believe that, you know, one of the things that people are going to want to do is go back to Israel as soon as possible. And we all believe, we all hope to have that light at the end of the tunnel. I personally hope so, because my son's bar mitzvah is supposed to be in Israel on July 1st.
Right.
And if it's not July 1st, it'll be in August. And if it's not in August, it'll be in December, but it'll be there. But we, as a community, I think what I'm hearing, and people on this call can correct me if I'm wrong, people are yearning to go back to Israel and visit the homeland. So I think the relationship is as strong as it's ever been, and more honest and more dynamic than ever, because it's not a financial relationship. It's a relationship that deeply cares about what's happening on the ground, invested in what's necessary to make change, right, for the positive. And I think that's the relationship today.
It's beautiful. So above all that you're doing and all that Federation is doing, you guys are already thinking past COVID, and earmarking trips and missions. Something very close to my heart, MOL, March of the Living.
Yep.
Have any talks begun about 2022 and sort of what that trip might look like?
So the short answer is yes, and we're exploring a whole bunch of different options, and I don't mean that as a throwaway line,
For sure.
but whether we're successful or not, it's not going to be today that are going to be determined. But we do have an unspoken goal that says we have two cohorts that missed. We'd like to find a place for them, and we have an upcoming cohort.
Yeah.
If we can find a moment in time where we could stand together 500, 600 strong, it might not be during the traditional March of Living time, right? Because that may not be the option. But if we could stand 600 strong from Montreal, doing what we set out to do when we had to cancel, making sure that we provide our generation, the future generations, to be witnesses of the greatest atrocities against the Jewish people, that would be one of those goals that I would love to fulfill. Now, again, there's space to get there. Planning is on the way, thinking of how to do it. But I'd love to be able to say that we were successful and that two cohorts did not miss the opportunity, just postpone the opportunity.
Sign me up.
You're in. I think you could even convince. You might even convince Howard to go again.
Howard.
Howard would go in a second. You know that. Howard would go in a second.
There we go.
Yair, thank you so much.
Thank you
for your efforts, for your love, and for your leadership. I really want to be conscious of time. I would like to open, if anyone has any questions. I think that probably the One of the best ways would be if you're able to drop a question into the chat box, or if you could raise your hand, and
Hey, raise your hand.
Asher Tannenbaum, our ritual director.
Hi,
Asher,
Yair.
there you go.
Yeah, sure.
Hi. Quick question. Could you talk just briefly about the program called Kahila?
Sound is
Not sure, you're choppy. Not sure if it's my internet or yours, but I think he asked.
I did not hear the question.
I heard, can you talk about the
Okay.
program Kahila?
Sure, Kahila, with pleasure. Kahila is today an agency of Federation. It actually began embedded within Federation. It is a mixed income housing project. We have built and now populated the first building in Côte Saint-Luc. If memory serves, 56 units. It is a mixed income housing project that is funded with the Accent Logis through the government and provides, let's call it subsidized housing and normative housing, so that it's a normative lifestyle for those who live in that building. The first building was targeted at young families, small young families. We are through Kahila exploring 4 other projects at this time to address the housing needs, and it's a much longer conversation, but I'll give you just a brief. If you look at the vulnerable parts of our community, the greatest way to address their needs would be through what we'd call, subsidized housing or affordable housing for their needs. That would be it's the greatest cost piece of anyone's income, and our goal is to have as many apartments available for them to live in as we can actually address in this community.
Any other questions? So I have a question. Besides donations, which I'm sure is always needed, what can we do? Does Federation need volunteers? What can we do?
So, this is amazing. So what we're doing now is incredibly important. I can't underemphasize that, right? So this is incredibly important. Overemphasize. Secondly, we always need volunteers. So if you'd like to volunteer, I'll send information where to reach our volunteers. That's important. I think that you have a community. I shouldn't say you, I'm talking as an insider. We have a community. One of the things that we did as Federation is in the first 3 weeks, we called 25,000 members of our community over the age of 60 just to check in on them. Do you need anything? Do you have anything? Do you want anything? As a community, if we could coordinate to do that for our membership alone and be able to report back to somebody to centralize it, and then pass that information to us. We have people who need food. We have people who mental health, whatever it is. Because sometimes, Federation's reach is an incredible reach, but is limited. And I'm the CEO, and I say that very openly. Where we were successful during this crisis is the networked approach. We didn't control everything. What we did is work with 122 institutions to reach Jews all the way from St. Lazare to the South Shore to I don't know where. And I have a heat map of all the Jews that we actually touched by postal code. But we didn't do that because Federation's reach. We did that because we worked with organizations who had a deeper reach.
Right.
So I encourage us as a community to say, and I'll get you all the information of where to send it to eventually and so on and so forth. But let's take care of our community, because if we can take care of our community and each institution took care of their community, then we'd be amplifying the impact that we had across the community.
Right. That's great. I mean, we as a show have certainly been on the phones for the last 10 months. And we have actually navigated people to Federation and to a lot of the resources that are offered, because we have heard that there is need. But definitely calls, touch points are very much needed. Any other questions?
I have a question actually for Yair.
Hi.
Hi. So you mentioned that your focus now is with mental health, which I think is a really, really important next step. I'm a physician in the community, a family doctor, and we've just been completely overwhelmed with mental health issues. So my question is, how are you actually going to get people connected to healthcare providers and to get them connected to psychologists? Because we have such an issue getting people the proper help that they need, given our system. So what do you have in mind for getting people really the help that they need, and how are you actually going to implement it?
So we're working through OMETS and the CJCS to try and work with the doctors that are available. We actually are investing in additional clinicians at OMETS so that we can have the triage happen at an earlier stage, and those who are I'm going to say experts in the field, because I'm not, who can actually intake the calls and do the right triage and hopefully address people to the right venue. And we are trying to work with, obviously, our healthcare system to promote the fact that we're doing all this. Ideally, there will be no backlog. That's the goal, is that we're going to try and make sure that there's no backlog. We're going to try and offload some of the cases. We're going to obviously refer others, but hopefully that there's no backlog in the system.
Okay, thanks.
Anyone else? Okay.
Adam,
Yeah.
I just make a comment that I know that the trip that Yair was talking about for next October also has several days in the UAE, which I thought was very interesting and will attract a lot of Montrealers. Is what?
Yes, Dubai.
Dubai, yeah.
So that's actually quite the coincidence. We had the chief rabbi of Dubai last week.
Last week, yeah.
On Zoom. Also Montrealer, Rabbi Yehuda Sarna. That sounds amazing.
Yeah.
Wow.
Guess we'll coordinate with him as well.
Certainly. Okay, Yair, again, thank you so much for your time.
I thank all of you. I thank you for taking the time to listen to my little spiel. I hope it's been helpful and informative. Let's keep on doing this, because this is critical.
Yeah.
And thank you all for your support of the Jewish community. It's
and I hope
this is the most incredible Jewish community in the world, and let's celebrate that as well.
Right.
Yeah.
Thank you, Yair.
There's applause and there's thumbs up from everyone. Laila Tov, everyone. I'm happy to leave the Zoom room open if you guys want to hang out and talk to each other.
Thank you, guys.
Everyone.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Yair.
Thanks, Yair. Very, very well. Very good. Okay.